A young man helped an elderly woman at the airport, not knowing her millionaire nephew was watching. The chaos of JFK International Airport was deafening that Friday morning. People rushed in all directions, carrying luggage, checking flight times, and saying goodbye to loved ones. Amid the confusion, Matthew Sanders, a 23-year-old young man, was the only one who noticed an elderly woman who seemed completely lost, repeatedly looking at a crumpled piece of paper in her trembling hands. "Ma'am, do you need help?" asked Matthew, approaching carefully so as not to startle the elderly woman, who was already showing signs of anxiety. The woman, who would later introduce herself as Augusta Oliver, looked at Matthew with eyes brimming with gratitude. Her wrinkled hands clutched her boarding pass while she tried to explain her situation. "My nephew left me here and said he'd be back, but it's been almost an hour. My flight to Miami leaves in 40 minutes, and I don't know where the gate is. These numbers don't make any sense to me, son." Matthew smiled reassuringly and asked permission to see her boarding pass. He explained patiently that the gate was in another terminal and they would need to take an airport shuttle. Without hesitation, he offered to accompany the woman there. "Come, Mrs. Augusta, I'll help you get there. Don't worry about the time. We'll still make it with plenty of time to board." What Matthew didn't realize was that a few yards away, a man was carefully observing the scene. Richard Oliver, Augusta's nephew and a successful businessman, had purposely left his aunt alone to take a business call. When he returned, he was surprised to see his aunt being accompanied by a stranger. As they walked toward the correct terminal, Augusta and Matthew engaged in casual conversation. The young man explained that he was at the airport photographing people for a personal project. He was a freelance photographer trying to build a portfolio of human expressions in moments of transition. "Photographs capture more than moments, Mrs. Augusta. They capture stories, feelings. It's like freezing a piece of someone's soul." The elderly woman's eyes lit up with genuine interest, something Matthew rarely saw when talking about his work. Richard followed the two at a distance, still suspicious of the young man who had offered to help his aunt. In today's society, acts of selfless kindness had become rare, and Richard, accustomed to the corporate world where everything had a price, couldn't believe that someone would simply help an elderly person without expecting something in return. When they reached the correct gate, Matthew made sure Augusta was comfortable and understood the next steps for boarding. The elderly woman, deeply grateful, insisted on getting the young man's contact information. "My boy, you saved me today. I'd really like to repay you somehow. You said you're a photographer, right? When I get back from Miami, perhaps we could talk more about that." Matthew smiled without great expectations and wrote his number on a piece of paper, handing it to Mrs. Augusta. They said goodbye with a firm handshake, and Matthew went on his way, returning to his photography project. Richard approached his aunt as soon as the young man walked away. His expression was a mixture of relief and irritation. "Aunt, I was looking for you. Who was that young man?" Augusta looked at her nephew with a serene expression that Richard hadn't seen on his aunt's face in a long time. "An angel who appeared when you left me alone, Richard. A young photographer who had the kindness to help me when I was lost." The comment hit Richard like an arrow. He knew he had neglected his aunt lately, always prioritizing his meetings and business. Seeing Augusta's gratitude toward a complete stranger made him question his own actions. 2 weeks passed since the incident at the airport. Matthew was in his small improvised studio in the living room of his modest apartment in the north side of Chicago when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Matthew? This is Augusta, the lady you helped at the airport 2 weeks ago. I hope I'm not bothering you." The elderly woman's voice sounded firm and warm, surprising Matthew, who never expected to receive that call. "Mrs. Augusta, of course I remember you. How was your trip to Miami?" "It was wonderful, my dear. I came back renewed. And I'm calling because I'd like to invite you for coffee. I'd love to talk more about your work with photography. Besides, I feel I need to properly thank you for your kindness." Matthew tried to politely decline, explaining that there was no need for thanks, but Mrs. Augusta's genuine insistence eventually convinced him. They agreed to meet the next day at a coffee shop downtown. What Matthew didn't know was that Richard, Augusta's Nephew had investigated his background over the last few days. As CEO of a successful real estate development company, Richard had resources and contacts to discover information about anyone. The report on Matthew Sanders was in his hands, son of a deceased father, mother who worked as a housekeeper, graduated in photography from a state college, worked as a freelancer, and supplemented his income as a waiter on weekends. Nothing that indicated immediate danger, but Richard remained suspicious of the young man's intentions regarding his elderly and wealthy aunt. The next day, Matthew arrived punctually at the indicated coffee shop. He wore a simple shirt, jeans, and carried his inseparable camera over his shoulder. He spotted Augusta sitting at a table in the back, drinking black coffee while leafing through a newspaper. "Mrs. Augusta, good afternoon," he greeted, extending his hand. The elderly woman rose with surprising energy for her 78 years and, ignoring his extended hand, hugged Matthew as if he were an old friend. "I'm so glad you came, young man. Please sit down. I've already ordered coffee for myself, but feel free to choose whatever you want." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The conversation flowed naturally, as if they had known each other for years. Augusta told him about her life in Miami, where she was born and raised before moving to New York at 30 to work as an engineer. She talked about her late husband, Martin, with whom she had 45 happy years of marriage, but they never had children. "I think that's why my nephew Richard feels so responsible for me. He's my brother Frederick's son, who has also passed away. Richard is a good boy, you know, just too consumed by that business world." Matthew listened attentively, genuinely interested in the elderly woman's life story. When it was his turn to speak, he told her about his passion for photography, which began when he received a simple camera from his father, John Sanders, shortly before he fell ill. "My father always said that a good photo tells a story better than 1,000 well-chosen words. He worked as a gardener for wealthy families, but had an incredible artistic eye. He taught himself photography with books borrowed from the public library." Augusta's eyes widened at the mention of Matthew's father's name. "John Sanders? Gardener?" she asked, with an expression difficult to decipher. "Yes, did you know my father?" Augusta seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if deciding what to say. "New York is a big city, but sometimes the world is too small. I think I knew a John Sanders who worked as a gardener many years ago, but I'm not sure if it would be the same man." The conversation continued, but Matthew noticed that something had changed in Mrs. Augusta's attitude. The elderly woman now seemed more thoughtful, almost melancholic. Before they parted, Augusta made an unexpected proposal. "Matthew, I'm looking for a project to occupy my time. I've always liked photography, but never had the patience to learn. I was thinking, would you give lessons to an old woman like me?" The young man smiled, surprised by the request. "Of course, Mrs. Augusta, it would be my pleasure." "Great, and I have another idea. I attend a senior center in Brooklyn. Many there are lonely people without family. Some are in vulnerable situations. What do you think of us doing a project together? Photography workshops for the seniors at the center." Matthew's eyes lit up at the possibility. It was exactly the kind of social project he had always dreamed of, but never had the resources to realize. "I would love that, Mrs. Augusta, but photography equipment is expensive and—" "Don't worry about that," Augusta interrupted with a wave of her hand. "I can finance the project. I have savings set aside, and I'd rather see them being used for something that makes a difference in people's lives." Matthew hesitated. The proposal was tempting, but he didn't want to give the impression that he was taking advantage of the elderly woman's generosity. "Think of it as paid work, Matthew. You'll be the teacher, the project coordinator. It's not charity, it's a professional opportunity." After some initial resistance, Matthew agreed to develop a proposal for the project. They exchanged more detailed contact information, and Augusta promised to introduce him to the coordinator of the senior center the following week. What neither of them knew was that Richard had hired a private investigator to follow Matthew. Augusta's nephew was watching from a distance in his luxury car as the two said goodbye at the door of the coffee shop. "I want to know everything about this young man, Paul. Complete background, family, debts, everything. My aunt is too naive, and I won't allow some opportunist to take advantage of her." "Yes, Mr. Richard. I'll continue monitoring his movements," replied the investigator, discreetly taking photos. The following week, as agreed, Augusta introduced Matthew to the New Dawn Senior Center in Brooklyn. The place was simple but welcoming, frequented by about 50 seniors from various social backgrounds. The coordinator, Ms. Clarice, an energetic 65-year-old woman, received the photography project proposal with enthusiasm. "This would be wonderful. For our members, many here need activities that stimulate not only motor coordination, but especially self-esteem and socialization," explained Clarice, while showing the facilities to Matthew and Augusta. During the visit, Matthew observed how Augusta interacted naturally with the other seniors, knowing most by name. It was evident that she had been frequenting that place for some time and was loved by everyone. The project was named Perspectives of Experience and would be held twice a week. Augusta discreetly purchased 10 simple digital cameras for the beginning of the activities, as well as a projector and a laptop for the theoretical classes. While Matthew prepared the content for the workshops, Augusta seemed increasingly excited about the project. She called the young man almost daily, suggesting ideas and sharing stories from her own life. In one of these conversations, Matthew mentioned his father again. "You know, Mrs. Augusta, my father would have loved this project. He always said that everyone deserves the chance to tell their own story, regardless of age or social condition." There was silence on the other end of the line before Augusta responded. "Your father seems to have been a wise man, Matthew. When did he pass away?" 7 years ago. He fell ill suddenly and within a few months left us. He was still young, only 45 years old. "I'm so sorry," Augusta replied with a choked voice. "And your mother? She works as a house cleaner. She's a warrior. She supported me and my younger sister after my father passed away. It was thanks to her effort that I was able to graduate in photography." The first workshop of the project took place on a sunny Tuesday in April. 15 seniors signed up, more than initially expected. Matthew was nervous, but Augusta's reassuring presence helped him conduct the class with confidence. "Welcome to the Perspectives of Experience project. My name is Matthew, I'm a photographer, and together with Mrs. Augusta, we're going to embark on a journey to rediscover the world through the lens of a camera." The seniors listened attentively, some with visible enthusiasm, others with expressions of doubt. Matthew continued, showing some of his photographs on the projector. "Photography is not just pressing a button, it's a form of expression, of telling stories. And you, with all the richness of your life experiences, have incredible stories to tell." The workshop was a success. Even the most reluctant participants ended up getting involved when Matthew proposed the first practical exercise, photographing something that represented joy for them. Mrs. Zulaida, an 83-year-old woman who rarely spoke, photographed a bird in the center's garden. "My husband loved birds," she explained in a soft voice. "He built houses for them in our yard. Whenever I see a free bird, I think of him." The emotion was palpable in the room when each participant showed their photo and explained their choice. Matthew realized that the project would be much more meaningful than he had initially imagined. At the end of the first workshop, as they were putting away the equipment, Augusta put her hand on Matthew's shoulder. "You have a special gift, young man, not just for photography, but for connecting with people. Thank you for accepting this partnership." Matthew smiled, genuinely touched by the compliment. "You're the one giving me this incredible opportunity. I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me. Sometimes life gives us chances to repair past mistakes," Augusta replied, with a distant look that Matthew couldn't interpret. As they left the center, a black BMW was parked across the street. Richard was observing the interaction between his aunt and the young photographer with growing concern. "He's completely manipulating my aunt," he muttered to himself, picking up his phone to call his lawyer. "Mr. Mendez, I need to speed up that process we discussed. My aunt is clearly being influenced by third parties." In the following weeks, The Perspectives of Experience project took on a life of its own. The seniors began bringing old photographs to share, creating an unexpected recovery of memories. Matthew had the idea of organizing these photos in a future exhibition, documenting the life stories of the participants. Augusta, in turn, was increasingly involved. She not only funded the project, but actively participated in the workshops, helping other seniors with technical difficulties, and sharing her own experiences. The friendship between Matthew and Augusta strengthened with each meeting. The young man began visiting the elderly woman at her home on weekends, a spacious apartment in the Upper East Side. It was during one of these visits that Matthew noticed, for the first time, a framed photograph on the living room shelf that caught his attention. It was an image of a beautiful garden, with red roses in the foreground and a large house in the background. It seemed strangely familiar. "What a beautiful garden, Mrs. Augusta. Where is it?" Augusta, who was serving coffee in the kitchen, took a while to respond. "It was the garden of my old house in Westchester. I sold it after Martin's passing. The apartment is more practical for an old woman alone." Matthew continued looking at the photograph, feeling an inexplicable uneasiness. "You know, this garden reminds me of something. My father used to talk about a rose garden he cared for years. It was his greatest professional pride." The silence that followed was heavy. Augusta returned from the kitchen with the coffee cups trembling in her hands. Her face had visibly paled. "Matthew, there's something I need to tell you. I don't know how or where to begin, but—" The sound of the doorbell interrupted the moment. It was Richard, who entered the apartment without waiting for an invitation, clearly displeased to see Matthew. "Aunt, I didn't know you had company," he commented dryly, giving the young man an icy look. "We need to discuss family matters in private." The tension in the air was palpable. Matthew realized it was time to leave. "Mrs. Augusta, we'll talk another day. Thank you for the coffee." "No, my dear, stay," Augusta requested with surprising firmness. "Richard, this is Matthew Sanders, the young man I told you about. We're working together on the Senior Center project." Richard forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, yes, the photographer. Aunt Augusta can't stop talking about this project and about you, Mr. Sanders. Seems you two have formed quite a duo." The sarcastic tone didn't go unnoticed. Matthew extended his hand politely. "Pleasure to officially meet you, Mr. Richard. Your aunt is an amazing person." Richard shook the offered hand with more force than necessary, maintaining the artificial smile. "The pleasure is mine. My aunt has always had too generous a heart. I hope you're appreciating the opportunity she's giving you." "Richard!" Augusta reprimanded, visibly uncomfortable with her nephew's insinuation. Matthew kept his composure, although he felt his blood heating up. "Don't worry, Mrs. Augusta. I understand your nephew's concern. And yes, Mr. Richard, I greatly value the partnership with your aunt, not just for the professional opportunity, but mainly for the friendship we've developed." The atmosphere remained tense for the next few minutes, until Matthew decided it was better to leave. Augusta accompanied him to the door, visibly embarrassed by her nephew's behavior. "I'm sorry about that, Matthew. Richard can sometimes be too protective." "No need to apologize, Mrs. Augusta. It's natural for him to worry about you. See you Tuesday at the center?" "Without fail, and Matthew, we really need to talk about something important, something I should have told you from the beginning." The young man nodded, intrigued, and said goodbye. As he waited for the elevator, he could hear raised voices coming from the apartment. Richard and Augusta were arguing, and although he couldn't make out the exact words, the tone was one of conflict. When he got home that night, Matthew couldn't stop thinking about the photograph of the rose garden and Augusta's reaction. There was something there, a connection he didn't yet fully understand. He decided to call his mother, Mrs. Helen, who lived in Queens, in the eastern part of New York City. "Mom, remember that rose garden Dad used to tend? Where was it exactly?" "In Westchester, son. It was a huge mansion. Why?" Matthew's heart raced. "Do you remember the name of the homeowners?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I think it was an engineer, Oliver, if I'm not mistaken. Why are you asking this now, Matthew?" The young man's mind was working quickly, connecting the dots. "Mom, what exactly happened for Dad to lose that job? You never wanted to go into details about it." Mrs. Helen sighed deeply. "Your father was accused of stealing jewelry from the house. It was a terrible injustice. John would never do such a thing. That accusation destroyed him inside, Matthew. He was never the same after that. Why are you digging up this story now?" Matthew felt a knot forming in his throat. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in a painful way. "Just curiosity, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Love you." That night, Matthew could barely sleep. If his suspicions were correct, Mrs. Augusta was his father's former employer, the woman who had unjustly accused him of theft. The same person who had now become his friend, his mentor and project partner. The irony of fate seemed like a cruel joke. The following Tuesday, Matthew arrived at the New Dawn Senior Center with a heavy heart and confused mind. Part of him wanted to confront Augusta immediately, demand explanations, perhaps even abandon the project. Another part hesitated, recognizing the complexity of human relationships and the possibility that there was more to that story than it appeared. Augusta was already there, chatting animatedly with some of the participants. When she saw Matthew, her smile faded, as if immediately perceiving that something had changed. "Good morning, Matthew. Everything okay?" "We need to talk, Mrs. Augusta, in private if possible." The elderly woman nodded seriously. "Let's go to the back room. The workshop only starts in half an hour." Once alone, Matthew got straight to the point. "You knew my father, didn't you? John Sanders, gardener at your house in Westchester. The same one you accused of theft 15 years ago." The words came out harsher than he intended. Augusta closed her eyes for a moment, as if receiving a physical blow. When she opened them again, they were teary. "Yes, Matthew, I suspected. Since you mentioned your father's name at the cafe. Then I confirmed it when you said he worked as a gardener. New York may be big, but coincidences are sometimes impressive. Why didn't you tell me before? How could I? Hello, I'm the woman who destroyed your father's career. I planned to tell you several times, but never found the courage. And the closer we got, the harder it became." Matthew crossed his arms, trying to control the anger he felt. "My father never stole anything from you. He was an honest man. That accusation destroyed him. He never got a steady job again, fell into depression, started drinking." "I know," interrupted Augusta with a trembling voice, "and I've carried that guilt for years, Matthew. I know you won't believe me now, but I discovered the truth a few months later. The jewelry appeared. They were hidden in a secret compartment of the closet that my wife had forgotten. And you didn't look for my father to apologize, to clear his name." Augusta lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I tried. I went to the address we had in his file, but you had already moved. I tried through mutual acquaintances, but no one could provide information. It was a different time without social media. And then, well, then life went on. It's a terrible excuse, I know." The silence that followed was heavy. Matthew was struggling internally between anger at the injustice his father had suffered and confusion over feeling genuine affection for the woman before him, who now seemed so fragile and remorseful. "You really didn't know who I was when you saw me at the airport?" "I had no idea, young man. I only began to suspect when you mentioned your last name and your father's profession. When I confirmed it, I was in shock. I wanted to believe it. Was a sign, a chance for reparation. And the project? Was it out of guilt? Pity?" Augusta took a deep breath before answering. "At first, maybe there was guilt. But the project is genuine, Matthew. The connection we've created with those seniors, the good we're doing, this transcends any initial motivation, and my friendship for you is genuine too." Matthew ran his hand through his hair, trying to process it all. He didn't know what to feel or how to react. "I need time to think, Mrs. Augusta. I don't know if I can continue with the project knowing all this." "I completely understand. If you decide to leave, I'll respect your decision, but before you go, there's something I want to show you." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. Augusta took a yellowed envelope from her bag. Inside was a handwritten letter and an old photograph. I found this among my husband's things after his death. It was kept in a box of memories. Matthew took the items carefully. The photograph showed his father, visibly younger, and Augusta side by side, smiling, in front of the rose garden he had recognized in the photograph in the apartment. Your father wasn't just my gardener, Matthew. He was my friend. Perhaps the only true friend I ever had. With trembling hands, Matthew unfolded the letter. It was written in his father's handwriting, addressed to Augusta. Dear Augusta, I know the circumstances of my departure were painful for both of us. Trust once broken is difficult to restore. I bear no grudge, as I understand your position as an employer and protector of your family. The years I spent caring for your garden were the happiest of my professional life. Each rose we planted together represented our unlikely friendship. An employer and an employee who, for a few hours on Saturday afternoons, were just two people passionate about the beauty of nature. I hope that one day the truth will come to light. Not for my job, which is already lost, but for the friendship we built. Take good care of the Alexandria roses. They need special attention in winter. With respect and friendship, John Sanders. Tears blurred Matthew's vision. He never imagined that his father and Augusta had been friends. John had never mentioned this at home. He spoke only of the garden with affection, but never of the employer. Your father wrote this before leaving. I never had the courage to respond. And when I finally found the courage, I no longer knew where to find him, explained Augusta, also emotional. When I saw you at the airport, helping a disoriented old woman without expecting anything in return, I saw John in you. The same kindness, the same dignity. Matthew carefully folded the letter and returned it along with the photograph. I need to go. I won't give the workshop today. I apologize. I understand. I'll cancel today's session. No. Matthew shook his head. Continue without me. They're counting on it. Just give me a few days. Augusta nodded, respecting the request. Matthew left quickly, needing fresh air and space to process that avalanche of revelations. In the center's parking lot, Richard waited in his car. He saw Matthew leaving hurriedly, with a disturbed expression, and smiled to himself. Looks like the honeymoon is over, he muttered, picking up his phone. Paul, keep following Sanders. I want to know where he's going now. Matthew walked aimlessly for some time, eventually arriving at a small park. He sat on an isolated bench and let the emotions dominate him. The pain of the injustice his father had suffered was confusingly mixed with understanding Augusta's genuine remorse. His father's letter revealed a facet he didn't know, the capacity to forgive, even in the face of grave injustice. How should he proceed now? Abandoning the project would mean letting down the seniors, who had already become attached to the workshops. It would also mean wasting a valuable professional opportunity. But continuing to work with Augusta after knowing the truth seemed like a betrayal of his father's memory. Or was it just the opposite? His father, in the letter, showed no resentment, only sadness for the lost friendship. Perhaps the real betrayal would be not giving Augusta the chance for redemption that she clearly sought. After hours of reflection, Matthew decided to return home. He needed to talk with his mother to better understand that story from her perspective. Mrs. Helen received him with surprise at her small apartment in Queens. As soon as she saw her son's expression, she realized that something serious had happened. "What is it, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." "That's more or less it, Mom," replied Matthew, sitting at the kitchen table. "Remember the photography project for seniors I'm doing? The lady who's financing it, Augusta Oliver, she's Dad's former employer, the woman who accused him of theft." Mrs. Helen dropped the spoon she was using to stir a pot of beans. Her expression changed completely. "How did you discover that?" "She told me today. Actually, she had been trying to tell me for days. Mom, she said she discovered afterward that Dad was innocent, that the jewelry appeared." Matthew's mother dried her hands on her apron and sat across from her son with a serious expression. "It's true. About a year after the accusation, we received a letter from her. Your father tore it up without reading. He was very hurt, Matthew. That accusation destroyed something inside him." Why did you never tell me about this? Your father asked me to never speak of that matter again. I respected his wishes, but know that in the last months before he passed, he talked a lot about this Augusta. I think deep down he missed that friendship. Matthew showed his mother the photograph that Augusta had shown him. Mrs. Helen held it lovingly, running her fingers over her husband's smiling face. Your father loved that rose garden. He spoke of it as if it were a piece of paradise on earth. He was always bringing seedlings to our small yard, trying to recreate a bit of that magical space. Mom, I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to abandon the project, cut ties with Mrs. Augusta. Another part recognizes that she's seeking redemption, right? Completed Helen, with the wisdom of someone who has lived enough to understand the complexity of human relationships. Son, grudges are a poison we take ourselves hoping the other person will die. Your father took time to understand this, but he did before he passed. What do you mean? In the last months, he wanted to find Mrs. Augusta. He said it was time to make peace, that life was too short to carry grudges. Unfortunately, the disease progressed very quickly and he didn't get that chance. Matthew absorbed those words, feeling as if his father was somehow guiding him in that difficult moment. What do you think I should do, Mum? Mrs. Helen smiled serenely. I can't decide for you, my son, but I think that if this project is helping people, if it's fulfilling you professionally, perhaps it's an opportunity to heal old wounds. Your father valued forgiveness above all, Matthew. It was his greatest teaching. After dinner with his mother, Matthew returned home with his mind still turbulent, but with a lighter heart. Mrs. Helen's words echoed in his thoughts, along with his father's letter. Perhaps that meeting with Augusta wasn't mere coincidence, but a chance to close a painful cycle with dignity. The next morning, Matthew made his decision. He called Augusta, who answered on the first ring, as if anxiously waiting for the call. Mrs. Augusta, can we meet? We need to talk. Of course, my dear, wherever you want. At the Botanical Garden in an hour. Do you know it? I know it well. I'll be there. The New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx was particularly quiet that Wednesday morning, Matthew arrived first and chose a bench near the Rose Garden, a symbolism that didn't go unnoticed when Augusta appeared, walking slowly in his direction. Thank you for coming, said Matthew, indicating the place beside him on the bench. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, replied Augusta, sitting down. I'll understand if you decide to abandon the project. Matthew took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. I spoke with my mother last night. She told me that my father, in the last months of his life, wanted to look for you to make peace. Augusta's eyes widened in genuine surprise. He wanted to see me? Yes, apparently he had overcome the hurt and desired a reunion. Unfortunately, the disease didn't allow it. Silent tears ran down Augusta's wrinkled face. John was always better than me. He had a capacity to forgive that I never possessed. That garden was never the same without him, you know. The Alexandria roses died the following winter, exactly as he warned in the letter. I thought a lot about all this, Mrs. Augusta, about the project, our friendship, the past, and I've come to the conclusion that abandoning now would be betraying my father's final wish. A breath of hope illuminated the elderly woman's face. Does that mean It means I'll continue with the Perspectives of Experience project. Not for you nor for me, but for the seniors who are benefiting. And perhaps with time, we can build something positive on the ruins of the past. Augusta extended her trembling hand. Thank you, Matthew. I promise I'll do everything in my power to honor your father's memory through this project. Matthew accepted the handshake, sealing a silent pact of new beginnings. As they walked through the garden, Augusta mentioned something that caught Matthew by surprise. There's something else I need to tell you. My nephew Richard, he's trying to have me declared legally incompetent. He claims I'm senile and unable to manage my own assets. What? But that's absurd. You're more lucid than many young people I know. Augusta smiled sadly. Richard has changed in recent years. After he became CEO of the company, it seems that money and power became his only motivations. I think he sees you as a threat to his plans. Why? Because I included the Perspectives of Experience project in my will, Matthew. I left a significant amount to ensure its continuity even after I'm no longer here. Matthew stopped walking, shocked by the revelation. Mrs. Augusta, you didn't need to do that. It was never my intention. I know, young man. That's exactly why I did it. Your integrity reminds me of your father. Augusta made a significant pause before continuing. I was thinking, the center needs a permanent photographic record of the workshops and activities, a visual documentary of the elderly. I'd like to officially hire you for that with an adequate monthly salary. What do you think? The proposal was tempting. Matthew was experiencing financial difficulties, with overdue bills and his sister's college tuition to help pay. But the shadow of suspicion still loomed. Mrs. Augusta, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want Richard to think I'm taking advantage of you. That would only give more ammunition for the incompetence process. I understand your concern, but we can't live in fear of shadows, Matthew. Let's do what's right. The rest will adjust. As they returned to the parking lot, neither of them noticed the man photographing them discreetly from inside a car. Paul, the investigator hired by Richard, smiled as he captured the moment when Augusta handed an envelope to Matthew. It was just a set of old photographs of the rose garden she wanted to share, but in the right hands, that image could tell a very different story. This will interest Mr. Richard very much, he muttered, sending the photos directly to his client. The next day, the photography workshops resumed at the New Dawn Senior Center. Matthew and Augusta had reached an agreement on how to proceed. The project would continue. Matthew would accept being officially hired as a documentarian, but he refused any mention in Augusta's will. The seniors immediately noticed the change in the dynamics between the two. The tension had been replaced by a collaborative serenity, as if an invisible weight had been removed. Ms. Clarice, the center's coordinator, approached during a break. I don't know what happened between you two, but I'm glad you resolved it. These seniors are flourishing with the photography project. Some who barely left their rooms now make a point of coming to the workshops. Matthew smiled, observing the animated group discussing their most recent photos. It's amazing how a simple camera can restore someone's sense of purpose, isn't it? Exactly, agreed Clarice. Oh, before I forget, a lawyer called asking for information about the project and about you, a Mr. Mendez. Matthew's smile disappeared. What did he want to know? Strange things. He asked if you had access to Mrs. Augusta's accounts, if she seemed confused or easily manipulated. Of course, I didn't answer any of that. I said he'd need a court order to disclose any information. Matthew thanked Clarice for her discretion and immediately sought out Augusta to tell her about the call. The elderly woman didn't seem surprised. He's Richard's lawyer. They're gathering evidence of my supposed senility. Just yesterday, I received a summons for a forensic psychiatric evaluation. That's absurd, can't you contest it? I'm trying, Matthew. I hired my own lawyer, Ms. Marina Quinn. She's excellent and confident that we'll be able to stop this nonsense. But Richard is persistent when he wants something. The concern on Augusta's face was evident. More than the issue of the incompetence itself, she seemed devastated by her nephew's attitude. I don't understand why he's doing this. I've always been generous with Richard. I paid for his education, gave him a share in the company when I started to step back. Augusta shook her head sadly. It seems it's never enough. That night, after the workshops, Matthew was invited to dinner at Augusta's home. The elderly woman wanted to show more photographs and documents related to the time when John Sanders had worked for her. It was a way of reconnecting with the past, an attempt to build bridges over the abyss of hurt and misunderstandings. As they reviewed old albums at the living room table, the doorbell rang. It was Richard, accompanied by a man in a suit who introduced himself as Mr. Mendez. "Aunt, we need to talk," announced Richard, entering without waiting for an invitation. His gaze narrowed when he saw Matthew there. "I didn't know we'd have company." "Matthew is always welcome in my home, Richard. What do you want at this hour?" Mr. Mendez cleared his throat, assuming a formal posture. "Mrs. Augusta, we've come to discuss the next steps in the incompetence process. The judge has scheduled the psychiatric evaluation for next week, and my lawyer is already handling that, sir," interrupted Augusta with surprising firmness. Any communication must be made through her. Aunt, we're concerned about you. Richard tried to sound sincere, but his cold look betrayed his true intentions. Your recent decisions demonstrate a lack of discernment, donating significant amounts to dubious projects, trusting strangers. Strangers? Augusta laughed without humor. Matthew is John Sanders' son, my former gardener and friend, the one I unjustly accused 15 years ago. Far from being a stranger, Richard. In fact, it's almost as if fate were giving me a second chance. The revelation seemed to surprise Richard, who looked at Matthew with new eyes. The gardener's son, the one who was fired for theft. For a false accusation of theft, corrected Augusta vehemently. A terrible mistake I made, and that I now have the opportunity to repair somehow. Mr. Mendez exchanged significant glances with Richard. That information seemed like valuable ammunition for them. Interesting, Mrs. Augusta. And don't you consider that perhaps you're being manipulated by feelings of guilt? That perhaps Mr. Sanders is taking advantage of this to obtain financial advantages? Matthew stood up, indignant. I will not allow insinuations of that nature, sir. I never asked Mrs. Augusta for anything. On the contrary, I was reluctant to accept her financial help for the project. And yet you accepted, didn't you? Retorted Richard with a sarcastic smile. Quite a coincidence, you accidentally helping my aunt at the airport without knowing who she was and now receiving money from her. Enough! Augusta's voice thundered in the room, surprising everyone. The elderly woman rarely raised her voice. Richard, you're going too far. Matthew is a young man of integrity who is helping me realize a meaningful project. If you're worried about your inheritance, rest assured, most of my assets will remain with you, as has always been the plan. But I will not allow you to defame the character of a young man who has only brought me joy and purpose in this phase of life. Mr. Mendez, realizing that the situation was deteriorating, tried to calm the mood. Mrs. Augusta, we only came to inform you about the date of the evaluation. It wasn't our intention to cause discomfort. Perhaps it's better to continue this conversation at another time when spirits are calmer. Excellent idea, sir, agreed Augusta, walking toward the door. And please, as I've already said, any future communication must be made through my lawyer. After Richard and Mr. Mendez left, Augusta collapsed on the sofa, visibly shaken by the confrontation. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Matthew. Richard has always been competitive and materialistic, but I never thought he would go this far. Don't worry about me, Mrs. Augusta. I'm more concerned about you. This incompetence process seems serious. It is serious, but it has no foundation. Marina assured me that it's almost impossible for them to succeed, considering my perfectly healthy mental state. But the process itself is draining. Matthew hesitated before asking the next question. Mrs. Augusta, have you thought that maybe I'm complicating your situation? Perhaps if I stepped away for a while, Richard might reconsider. Don't even think about that. Augusta was emphatic. I won't allow Richard or anyone to keep you away from the project or from my life. I spent too much time regretting not having sought your father to apologize. I won't make the same mistake twice. The determination in the elderly woman's gaze was moving. Matthew nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and responsibility. In that case, we need a plan to deal with Richard and this process. We can't allow him to harm the project or you. Augusta smiled, a gleam of astuteness in her tired eyes. You know, Matthew, after 78 years in this world, I've learned that the best defense isn't always attack. Sometimes it's simply letting the truth naturally come to light. In the following days, the Perspectives of Experience project gained new momentum. Matthew proposed that the seniors capture images related to their most significant memories, creating a visual narrative of their lives. The response was enthusiastic, with participants bringing personal objects, telling moving stories, and for the first time, many of them sharing pains and joys kept for decades. Mrs. Zulaidi, the quiet lady who rarely spoke, surprised everyone, with a series of photographs of birds in different locations around the city. My husband used to say that birds carry our messages to those who have departed, she explained with a choked voice. Each time I photograph one, I feel like I'm sending a message to him. Mr. Clement, a former history teacher of 86 years, photographed old books, each representing a phase of his life. This was the book I was reading when I met my wife, this other one when my son was born, this one when I retired. Books marked time better than any calendar. The dynamics of the project changed. It was no longer just a technical workshop on photography, but a therapeutic space for memory and reframing. Matthew, inspired by the seniors' engagement, had the idea of organizing an exhibition open to the public. We could show the photographs and tell the stories behind them. It would be a way to give visibility to the project and, more importantly, value the narratives of these seniors who often feel invisible in society. Augusta loved the idea and immediately offered to finance the exhibition. They found a cultural space in Williamsburg that would provide the venue for 2 weeks. The date was set for a month from then, enough time to properly prepare the material. The enthusiasm around the exhibition was contagious. The seniors gained new energy, dedicating themselves diligently to improving their photographic techniques. Matthew, in turn, worked tirelessly on curating the images and organizing the event. One afternoon, while documenting one of the workshops, Matthew accidentally left his camera recording during a break. It was only the following night, when reviewing the material at home, that he made a disturbing discovery. The camera had captured a conversation between Richard and Mr. Mendez at the door of the senior center. "The psychiatric report is the problem, Richard. Your aunt is perfectly lucid. No serious specialist will attest to mental incapacity." "Then find one who's not so serious, sir. I'm paying enough for that. We need to accelerate this process before my aunt donates more of my inheritance to useless projects like this one." Matthew was paralyzed in front of the computer screen. The recording was short but unequivocal. Richard was willing to defraud the incompetence process, to take control of Augusta's assets as soon as possible. His first reaction was to call Augusta, but it was late at night. He decided to wait until the next morning and personally show the recording to the elderly woman and her lawyer. When he arrived at Augusta's apartment the next morning, he found her dejected, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee in front of her. "Mrs. Augusta, did something happen?" The elderly woman looked up, her red eyes indicating she had been crying. "Richard hired a company to clean my apartment while I was at the center yesterday. They took important documents, including old photographs, including that one of the rose garden with your father." Indignation took over Matthew. "That's breaking and entering. We can call the police." "It wouldn't help, young man. The company has a contract signed by me from years ago for cleaning services. Richard just reactivated it. Legally, they had permission to be here. Even so, taking personal documents, they claim they were just organizing." Augusta ran her hand over her tired face. "I know it's Richard's doing, of course. He's trying to destabilize me, create situations that can be interpreted as mental confusion. And I must admit he's succeeding. I feel violated, as if my own home is no longer mine." Matthew sat next to the elderly woman, placing his hand on her shoulder, in a gesture of support. "Mrs. Augusta, I came precisely because I discovered something important. I think we have a way to stop Richard." He explained about the accidental recording and showed the video on the laptop he had brought. Augusta watched in silence, her expression changing from surprise to a somber determination. "We need to show this to Marina immediately. It's the proof we needed." They called the lawyer, who arrived at the apartment in less than an hour. Ms. Marina Quinn was a middle-aged woman with a firm posture and analytical gaze. She watched the recording twice, making detailed notes. "This is gold, gentlemen. It constitutes attempted procedural fraud. With this, we not only stop the incompetence process, but we can counterattack." She looked directly at Augusta. "Would you like to file a complaint against your nephew?" Augusta hesitated, the conflict evident on her face. "He's my only living relative, Marina. My brother Frederick's son, who has also passed away. I don't know if I could—" "I understand your reluctance, Mrs. Augusta, but I must warn you. Richard is not showing the same level of family consideration. He is actively trying to harm you." Perhaps we can use the recording just to stop the incompetence process, without necessarily initiating criminal action against Richard, suggested Matthew, perceiving the elderly woman's dilemma. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Marina nodded, understanding. It's a possibility. We can use this as a negotiation element, a kind of forced truce. Augusta seemed relieved with this approach. I prefer it that way. Despite everything, I don't wish harm to Richard. I just want him to stop this persecution and let me live my last years in peace. The lawyer kept a copy of the recording and promised to act quickly. Before leaving, she made a final recommendation. Mrs. Augusta, it would be prudent for you not to stay alone in the coming days. Richard may not react well when he realizes he's lost control of the situation. She can stay with me, Matthew promptly offered. My apartment is small but comfortable, and I'd feel more at ease having you nearby. Augusta smiled, grateful for the offer. Thank you, my dear, but I think I have a better idea. I was thinking of taking a short trip, perhaps to Miami. You could meet your mother and sister, and it would be good for me to get away from New York for a while as this situation resolves. The suggestion positively surprised Matthew. The idea of Augusta meeting his family, especially his mother, seemed a perfect way to close the circle of reconciliation they had begun. I think that's an excellent idea. I'm sure my mother would be happy to receive you. She always said that forgiving is a gift we give ourselves. After Marina left, Matthew helped Augusta organize a small suitcase for the trip they planned to take the next day. The elderly woman seemed lighter, almost excited about the prospect of the trip, like a child about to embark on an adventure. You know, Matthew, it's been over 20 years since I've been to Miami. Since I moved to New York, I've always found excuses not to go back. I think deep down I was afraid to face the memories. What memories, Mrs. Augusta? My family was from there. My parents, my brother, all buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. I was the only one who left, who sought life elsewhere. Sometimes I wonder if it was the right choice. As they packed clothes and personal items into the suitcase, Augusta continued her reminiscences, sharing childhood stories she had never told anyone. Matthew listened attentively, realizing how much this elderly woman needed to be heard, how much she yearned for genuine connection. My father was a rigid man, one of the old school. He rarely showed affection. Augusta carefully folded a shirt as she spoke, but he had a secret passion for plants. The yard of our house in Miami was full of ferns and flowers that he cultivated in his spare time. I think I inherited the love for gardens from him. And is that why you connected so much with my father? Augusta nodded, thoughtful. John understood. Plants like no one else. It wasn't just technique, you know. It was almost spiritual the way he related to the garden. She paused, smiling at the memory. I remember once when a pest attacked the rose bushes. All the specialists I hired said it would be necessary to uproot everything and start over. John asked for a week to try to save the plants. I spent 7 days watching him work in that garden. He talked to the rose bushes, prepared strange mixtures of natural ingredients, arrived at dawn and left at nightfall. On the 8th day, the first roses began to regain their color. Matthew smiled, recognizing his father in that description. He always said that plants are like people. They need more love and patience than expensive products. Exactly, Augusta laughed, her eyes glistening with contained tears. Your father taught me more about life by taking care of that garden than any philosophy book I've ever read. The moment of sharing was interrupted by the insistent ringing of the doorbell. Matthew and Augusta exchanged apprehensive looks. It was late at night for social visits. It must be Richard, murmured Augusta, visibly tense. Perhaps Marina has already spoken with him. Matthew approached the door cautiously. Who is it? It's me, Aunt. We need to talk, came Richard's voice from the other side, with a tone difficult to interpret. Augusta signaled for Matthew to open the door. The young man obeyed reluctantly, positioning himself protectively beside the elderly woman. Richard entered, alone this time. He seemed dejected, different from the arrogant posture he usually displayed. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying or drinking. "Marina called me," he said without preamble. "She showed me the video." Augusta remained calm. "And what do you have to say, Richard?" The nephew threw himself on the sofa, running his deleted hands over his face in a gesture of fatigue. "What do you want me to say, Aunt? That I'm sorry, that I'm remorseful?" His tone was a mixture of anger and shame. "You don't understand the pressure I'm facing. The company is having problems, debts accumulating. And you thought the solution would be to take control of my money," completed Augusta, with sadness in her voice. "Richard, if you needed financial help, why didn't you ask directly? I've always helped you when you needed it." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "Ask? Like a beggar? After all I've done for this family, for you? I took over the company when you wanted to retire. I continued your legacy. I deserved more than crumbs." "Crumbs?" Augusta's voice rose for the first time. "I gave you 40% of the company's shares, paid for your education abroad, your apartment. What more did you want, Richard?" The nephew stood up, facing his aunt with challenging eyes. "I wanted you to treat me like a son, like your legitimate heir, not like an employee to whom you occasionally grant favors." The revelation seemed to hit Augusta like a punch. Matthew observed the scene, feeling almost like an intruder in that intensely family moment. "Richard, I've always considered you like a son. Since your father passed, you've become my closest family. Then why are you donating part of my inheritance to strangers? To projects?" Richard accusingly pointed at Matthew. "To the son of your gardener." Augusta sighed deeply, as if the weight of decades of misunderstanding finally hit her. "Has money always been so important to you, my nephew? More important than my happiness, than the good we can do?" Richard seemed genuinely confused by the question. "It's not just about money, Aunt. It's about respect, about recognition, about my place in your life." Matthew, realizing that his presence might be complicating the dialogue, moved discreetly toward the door. "Perhaps it's better if I leave you alone to talk." "No," said Augusta, surprising both Matthew and Richard. "I want you to stay, Matthew. Richard needs to understand something important." The elderly woman walked slowly to the bookshelf and took out an old folder, the kind that yellows with time. From inside, she extracted a document. "This is my will, Richard. The original is with Marina, but this is a copy. I'd like you to read it." The nephew took the document with suspicion. As he read, his expression changed from hostility to surprise, and finally to something close to shame. 70% of your assets? For me? It's always been that way since your father passed. I never changed that. The other 30% is divided among some charities, and recently, a small part to ensure the continuity of the perspectives of experience. Project? But you have always been and will continue to be my main heir. Richard seemed genuinely shocked. "But Paul, the investigator, he said you were changing the will, that you were going to leave everything to the project and to him." He pointed at Matthew. Augusta shook her head with a sad smile. "And you believe that without coming to speak to me directly, without asking me, your aunt, who has always taken care of you?" The shame was evident on Richard's face now. I don't know what to say." "How about starting with an apology?" suggested Augusta with gentleness. "Not to me, necessarily, but to Matthew, whom you tried to defame, to the seniors at the center, whose project you tried to destroy, to yourself for allowing yourself to be consumed by unfounded suspicions and greed." Richard looked at Matthew, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry for the troubles," he muttered, without much conviction. It wasn't exactly the sincere apology Augusta expected, but it was a start. The elderly woman sighed, too tired to insist at that moment. "Richard, we're planning a trip to Miami tomorrow. I'd like you, in our absence, to reflect on your actions and what really matters in life. When we return, I hope we can rebuild our relationship on healthier foundations." The nephew nodded without arguing. The defeat in his plans seemed to have temporarily emptied him of his usual arrogance. "I'll withdraw the incompetence process," he said, before leaving. "Marina must already be preparing the papers." After Richard left, Augusta collapsed on the sofa, emotionally and physically exhausted. "I've faced less draining corporate negotiations than this family conversation," she tried to joke, but her voice betrayed the deep sadness. Matthew sat beside her, offering silent support. "Do you think he'll really change?" Augusta reflected for a moment. "I don't know, young man. Richard is trapped in behavioral patterns that took years to build. True changes require self-knowledge and humility, qualities that my nephew still needs to develop. But hope is the last to die, isn't that what they say?" That night, Augusta slept in the guest room of Matthew's apartment. The trip to Miami was postponed for a few weeks, until the situation with Richard was completely resolved and the photography exhibition project was more advanced. In the following weeks, a pleasant routine was established. Augusta spent the mornings at the New Dawn Senior Center, actively participating in the photography workshops. While Matthew divided his time between the project and freelance commercial photography work, he began to receive thanks to the visibility of perspectives of experience. The exhibition was taking shape. Each participating senior would have their own panel with their best photographs and a brief life story. Matthew worked tirelessly on the curation, while Augusta took care of the logistical and financial aspects. Richard kept his word and withdrew the incompetence process. Although he still kept his distance, he occasionally called his aunt to check how she was doing. Small steps toward a possible reconciliation. One afternoon, while working on the preparations for the exhibition at the Cultural Center, Matthew received an unexpected call. It was Paul, the private investigator Richard had hired. "Mr. Sanders, this is Paul Rivera." "I know who you are," Matthew replied coldly. "What do you want?" "I have something that might interest you and Mrs. Oliver. Something I found during my investigations for Richard." Matthew hesitated, suspicious. "Why are you contacting me now? Isn't Richard your client anymore?" "Let's say I have my own reasons. Can I meet you at the Senior Center tomorrow?" After consulting with Augusta, Matthew agreed to the meeting. The next day, Paul appeared punctually at the agreed time. He seemed nervous, carrying a document folder under his arm. "Thank you for receiving me," he said, after Matthew led him to a private room where Augusta was waiting. "What I'm going to show you might change a lot of things." Carefully, he took an old, already yellowed photograph from the folder. It showed a group of young people in front of a university building holding protest signs against the military dictatorship. Among them, to Matthew's shock, were two familiar faces. A young Augusta with long hair and beard, and beside her, unmistakably, John Sanders. "Where did you get this?" asked Augusta, visibly emotional at seeing the photograph. "In the archives of the old intelligence service. Part of my investigation included checking if you had any political skeletons in the closet. I found this photo and several documents indicating that you and John Sanders participated together in the student movement in the 70s. In fact, you were briefly imprisoned in 1972, and John was the one who organized your release through contacts in the church." Matthew looked from the photograph to Augusta, astonished. "You and my father were friends since college." Augusta took the photograph with trembling hands, her eyes fixed on the past it represented. "Yes, Matthew. John and I were young idealists, fighting for a democratic America. Your father was a student of agronomy. I was in engineering." Augusta's voice choked with the memory. "After they released me, I had to hide for a while. I lost contact with many people, including John. Years later, when things settled and I was already established as a businesswoman, we met again by chance. He was going through financial difficulties, had abandoned college to support his family. I offered him a job as a gardener at my house. Why did you never tell me this?" questioned Matthew, trying to absorb that surprising revelation. "Shame, perhaps. Shame of how our lives took such different paths. I became part of the system that we once fought against, while John—" Augusta didn't complete the sentence, but the feeling was clear. Paul cleared his throat, calling attention to himself again. "There's more." He took another document from the folder. "This is a letter I found among Richard's personal archives. Apparently, he intercepted it years ago when he still worked for you. It was a letter from John to Augusta, dated a few months before his death. Dear Augusta, years have passed since our misunderstanding. Life has taught me that time is too short to hold grudges. The disease I now face has shown me what really matters. I would like to see you again, friend of my youth, companion in struggles. Not to demand explanations or ask for compensations, but to remember the time when we believed we could change the world with our ideas and courage. The Alexandria roses that we planted together in your garden symbolized our hope for better days. Perhaps it's time to plant new seeds before the winter of life comes to an end. Your always friend, John Sanders. Matthew couldn't contain the tears that ran freely down his face. His father's unsent letter to Augusta revealed a depth of relationship that went far beyond the bond between employer and employee. Richard never delivered this letter, explained Paul. I found it in a box along with other documents that he considered potentially problematic for his interests. Augusta covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I never knew. John tried to contact me before he passed, and I never knew. Paul stood up, respectfully placing the folder on the table. I'll leave all the documents with you, including some that demonstrate that Richard has been diverting funds from the company for at least 2 years. Faced with Augusta's surprised, "Look," he added, "I'm an investigator, Mrs. Oliver. I investigate all sides." After Paul left, Matthew and Augusta remained in silence for long minutes, absorbing the impact of the revelations. The history that united them was much deeper and more complex than they had imagined. Your father was an extraordinary man, Matthew, Augusta finally said, wiping away tears. An idealist to the end. And I lost my way. I forgot who I was, what we believed in. It's never too late to remember, Mrs. Augusta, to replant those roses. In the days that followed, a subtle transformation occurred in the dynamics between Matthew and Augusta. They were no longer just project partners, not even friends united by an unlikely coincidence of fate. They were heirs to an interrupted friendship, guardians of ideals and memories that transcended their own lives. The Perspectives of Experience exhibition was inaugurated on a special Thursday night. The cultural space in Williamsburg was packed. Families of the participating seniors, local journalists, photography students, and community members attended in large numbers, curious to learn about the project that was gaining visibility on social media. The photographs arranged on elegant panels told powerful visual stories. Each senior had their space, with a small biography and their best images. The impact was undeniable. Faces usually invisible in society gained prominence, their perspectives and memories valued as art. Mrs. Zuleider, previously so reserved, now circulated proudly among the visitors, explaining her bird photographs and the symbolism they carried. Mr. Clement gathered former students around his images of books, sharing stories of decades of teaching. In a special corner of the exhibition, Matthew and Augusta mounted a differentiated panel, Seeds of Resistance. In it, they displayed the photograph discovered by Paul, showing the young Augusta and John in their university protest, along with other images from the era and the never-delivered letter. It was a tribute, not only to John Sanders, but to all, those who once dreamed of a more just America, and who, in one way or another, continued to fight for that ideal in their own spheres of influence. The surprise of the night was Richard's presence. Augusta's nephew arrived discreetly, wearing a casual suit instead of his usual executive attire. He approached his aunt and Matthew timidly as they talked with journalists. "The exhibition is incredible," he commented when he finally managed to speak with them alone. "You've done something really meaningful here." Augusta smiled, placing her hand on her nephew's shoulder. "Thank you for coming, Richard. It means a lot to me." The nephew seemed embarrassed, like someone trying to find the right words after a long time of silence. "I found these documents in my personal archive," he said, handing a folder to Augusta. "I think you should have them." Inside the folder were more old photographs of Augusta and John, correspondence exchanged during the period of political activism, newspaper clippings from the time, memories that Richard had concealed for years, fearing that the ties between his aunt and the gardener would somehow diminish his own importance in Augusta's life. "Why are you giving me this now?" asked Augusta, genuinely curious. Richard sighed, looking around at the seniors and their photographs. "Because I finally understood what you were trying to tell me. About what really matters in life. He made a significant pause before continuing. And because I remembered something your friend John told me once, when I was a teenager. We only own what we share. What we keep just for ourselves ends up possessing us. Matthew smiled, recognizing in the phrase the characteristic wisdom of his father. He used to say that to me and my sister too. An announcement interrupted the conversation. It was time for the official opening speeches of the exhibition. Matthew, as curator and creator, was invited to speak first. Before the attentive audience, the young photographer briefly shared the trajectory of the Perspectives of Experience project, thanking everyone involved, especially the participating seniors who had entrusted their stories and memories to the lenses of the cameras. But this exhibition is more than a collection of photographs, he continued, with emotion in his voice. It's a testimony to how the encounters in our lives can be transformative, of how chance, or perhaps destiny, can unite us with people who change our trajectory. His eyes found Augusta's in the audience. My father, John Sanders, believed that a photograph captures more than a moment. It captures a feeling, a story, a connection. That's what we see here today. Connections between generations, between past and present, between people who otherwise might never have met. Augusta was the next to speak. With the dignity of her 78 years, she climbed to the small stage with firm steps, taking with her the folder recently received from Richard. When I was young, I believed I could change the world through grand gestures, through revolutions, through collective movements. She opened the folder, showing one of the photographs to the audience, her and John raising fists in protest. My friend John Sanders was by my side on this journey. We fought together for a better America. We dreamed together of more just days. She paused, visibly emotional. Life separated us. I became a businesswoman, he a gardener. And in a terrible mistake that I will carry forever, I broke our friendship through unfounded suspicion. Augusta looked directly at Matthew. But fate, in its infinite wisdom, gave me a second chance. Through John's son, I was able to reconnect with the ideals of my youth, with the essence of what really matters. The audience listened in respectful silence. This project, Perspectives of Experience, is not just about teaching photography to seniors. It's about recognizing the value of the stories that each one carries. It's about planting seeds of dignity, respect, and human connection. It's about transforming perspectives, not just the perspective of the photographer, but society's perspective on old age, on memory, on our roots. Augusta closed the folder with a serene smile. John Sanders is not here to see the fruit of our youthful dreams, but his spirit is present in every photograph of this exhibition, in every rediscovered smile, in every valued story. And mainly, he lives on through his son Matthew, who inherited not only his talent, but his ability to see beauty where others see only the ordinary. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience when Augusta concluded her speech. The emotion was palpable, especially among the participating seniors, who saw their own stories reflected in the words of the retired engineer. After the speeches, the exhibition was officially open to the public. The space quickly filled with animated voices, comments about the photographs, stories being shared. The project had achieved its main objective, giving visibility and voice to a generation often forgotten and silenced. The day after the exhibition opening, Matthew and Augusta finally embarked for Miami. The trip, postponed for weeks due to the events with Richard and the preparations for the exhibition, now gained new meaning. It was a pilgrimage to the roots, a settling of accounts with the past. Mrs. Helen was waiting for them at the small Miami airport, anxious to personally meet the woman who had been her husband's employer and friend, and who had now become her son's mentor. The meeting was emotional. Helen and Augusta embraced for a long time, like old friends who finally reunite after years of separation. "John talked a lot about you in the last days," said Helen, while they drove to her house. "He wanted so much to see you again." "The feeling was mutual," replied Augusta with a choked voice. "I only realized too late how much his friendship meant to me." Helen's house in Miami was simple but welcoming. Carmen, Matthew's younger sister, was waiting on the porch. A nursing student, she had the same expressive eyes as her father, and the resilient determination of her mother. The days in Miami were of reconnection and healing. Augusta met the small garden that John had cultivated in the backyard of the house, with seedlings brought from the garden of the mansion in Westchester. Among the plants, to her surprise and emotion, grew some Alexandria roses, unlikely survivors of the variety that she and John had cultivated together years before. "He never gave up on them," explained Helen, watching the elderly woman caress the petals with infinite delicacy. "He said they were special, that they had history." One afternoon, while Matthew photographed the city for his personal collection, Augusta and Helen sat in the small garden, sharing memories of John that they had never shared before. "He never told me about your participation in the student movement," commented Helen. "I only came to know about it years later when I found some old pamphlets among his things." John was cautious. Even after things settled down, he maintained a certain reluctance to speak openly about that time, perhaps to protect you and the children. Helen nodded, understanding. "When you met again, after years without contact, and you hired him as the gardener, he seemed happy, you know. He came home radiant, talking about the plants, about the garden project. He never seemed resentful of working for a former companion who had made it." Augusta lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I should have valued that friendship more. I should have treated John as the friend he was, not as an employee. The social distance I created between us was my greatest failure." "Don't torture yourself, Augusta." Helen gently touched the elderly woman's arm. John understood the complexities of life, the masks we all need to wear at certain moments. He valued those Saturday afternoons when you worked together in the garden, when the social barriers briefly disappeared. That night, after a home-cooked dinner prepared by Helen, the family gathered in the living room to watch old videos in which John appeared. For Augusta, it was like rediscovering a lost friend. For Matthew, a chance to see his father in a new perspective, not just as the skilled gardener he had known, but as a young idealist who had fought for his principles. In one of the videos, John Sanders appeared working in a small community garden he had helped create in an underprivileged neighborhood of Miami. He explained to local children how to grow vegetables, the importance of caring for the earth, the cycle of life represented in each planted seed. "That social project was his great passion in the last years," explained Helen. "It started as a hobby after the illness, but quickly became his purpose." Augusta and Matthew exchanged significant looks. It was impossible not to see the parallels between John's social project with children and plants and the perspectives of experience project they had developed with seniors and photography. "It seems we're following in his footsteps without even realizing it," commented Matthew, emotional. "Perhaps it's his way of remaining present, guiding our choices in some way we don't fully understand," suggested Augusta. The next morning, they visited Woodlawn Cemetery, where John was buried. Augusta brought a bouquet of Alexandria roses, specially cultivated for the occasion. Before the simple headstone, the elderly woman knelt with difficulty, depositing the flowers with infinite care. "I took too long to come here, my friend," she murmured, while Matthew and Helen observed, a few steps away, respecting that intimate moment. "Forgive me for all my mistakes, for all my cowardice. Your friendship was one of the greatest gifts I received in life, and I didn't know how to value it properly." Matthew approached, placing his hand on Augusta's shoulder. "My father knew how to forgive Mrs. Augusta. I'm sure he forgave you a long time ago." The elderly woman rose with some difficulty, wiping discreet tears. "What consoles me is knowing that somehow he lives on through you, Matthew, not just physically, but in your values, in your integrity. And through this project we've built, together we honor his memory every day." After the moment of recollection at the cemetery, the small expanded family, Helen, Carmen, Matthew, and Augusta, headed to the community garden that John had helped found. The place had grown in recent years, becoming an important center of environmental education in the neighborhood. They were received by Joe, a man of about 60 who had been John's friend and now coordinated the garden. When Matthew called saying, "You'd be visiting, I couldn't believe it," exclaimed Joe, warmly embracing each of them. "And you must be Mrs. Augusta, am I right? John talked a lot about you." "Just Augusta, please," corrected the elderly woman, embarrassed. "I'm just an old friend, nothing more." Joe smiled, his eyes revealing that he knew more than he let on. "John always said that one day you would visit this place. He had that certainty, you know. He said it was a matter of time until the circles closed." The visit to the garden was revealing. Several cultivation methods implemented there had been inspired by techniques that John had learned working in Augusta's garden. The neighborhood children, now teenagers and young adults, kept the gardener's educational legacy alive, transmitting his knowledge to new generations. In a special corner of the garden, protected by a small cover, grew Alexandria rose seedlings, the same variety that John and Augusta had cultivated together so many years before. "He never let this species die," explained Joe. "He said these roses had history, that they represented a friendship that time couldn't completely erase." Augusta approached the rose bushes, delicately touching their still closed buds. "They were always stubborn," she commented with a nostalgic smile. "Difficult to grow, demanding about soil and climate, but when they bloom, there's no more beautiful or fragrant rose." "Like certain friendships," added Matthew, catching the metaphor. "They require work, dedication, but when they bloom, they transform lives." During the rest of the week in Miami, Matthew, Augusta, and the Sanders family immersed themselves in a journey of reconnection with the past. They visited significant places for John and Augusta during their youth: the old college where they had met, the meeting points of the student movement, the first apartment that John and Helen had shared after marriage. At each place, Matthew recorded everything with his camera, creating a visual archive of that emotional journey. The photographs captured not just landscapes and buildings, but mainly expressions. Augusta's distant look as she revisited her past, Helen's serene smile as she shared memories, Carmen's curiosity as she discovered unknown facets of her father. On the eve of their return to New York, as they dined in the small backyard of Helen's house under a starry Miami sky, Matthew made an unexpected proposal. "I want to expand the Perspectives of Experience project," he announced, as everyone savored a delicious seafood stew prepared by his mother. "Not just continue with the seniors in New York, but bring the concept here to Miami, starting with the community garden." Augusta's eyes lit up with interest. "How would that work?" "A fusion of legacies, the social work with plants that my father started here, combined with the photography we developed there. We could create workshops for the young people at the garden to document the development of the plants, the impact of the project on the community, and simultaneously start a new center of workshops for seniors here in Miami." Helen smiled, proud of her son's vision. "John would have loved this idea, Matthew. The perfect combination of his passions: plants, people, and social transformation." "And how would we do this logistically?" asked Augusta, always practical. "Would you have to split yourself between New York and Miami?" Matthew hesitated briefly before answering. "Actually, I was thinking of something more ambitious, hiring and training local facilitators in both cities, transforming perspectives of experience into a replicable methodology that could be implemented in different contexts and communities." Carmen, who until then had just been listening, spoke up with enthusiasm. "I could coordinate the Miami Center," she readily offered. "I'm in my last year of nursing. I have experience with seniors because of my internships, and I've always liked photography. It would be perfect." Carmen's excitement was contagious. Augusta observed the scene with a contemplative expression, as if evaluating possibilities that went far beyond that moment. "You know, Matthew, this project has the potential to become something much bigger than we initially imagined. Not just a pastime for seniors or a form of personal redemption for me. It can be a genuine movement of intergenerational connection, of memory preservation, of dignity." "That's exactly what I'm envisioning, Mrs. Augusta. But for that, we'd need more resources, more people involved." "Money is not a problem," affirmed Augusta, with decision in her voice. "I can finance the initial expansion. But for sustainable growth, we would need to establish a formal structure, a non-profit organization, perhaps." Helen, who was listening attentively to the conversation, intervened with her practical wisdom. "You're dreaming big, and that's beautiful. But don't forget to maintain the original spirit of the project. John always said that the most successful social projects are those that maintain their human essence, even as they grow." "Your mother is right, Matthew. agreed Augusta. The challenge will be to expand without losing the soul of the project. That night, under the stars of Miami, an expanded vision of perspectives of experience was born. No longer just a local project, but the embryo of a movement that could touch lives in different cities, connecting generations through art and memory. The next morning, before departing for the airport, Augusta asked Helen's permission to take some seedlings of the Alexandria roses from the garden. She wanted to replant them in New York as a tangible symbol of the reconnection with John and all he represented. These roses survived against all odds, Helen, just like the friendship between John and me, which not even death could completely erase. I want to care for them as a daily reminder of what really matters in life. Helen, emotional, not only agreed but insisted on personally preparing the seedlings for the journey, carefully packaging them so they would survive the trip. Back in New York, Matthew and Augusta were received with enthusiasm at the New Dawn Senior Center. The Perspectives of Experience exhibition had been a huge success, attracting more visitors than expected and receiving coverage from local newspapers and even a regional television channel. Ms. Clarice, the center's coordinator, could barely contain her excitement as she reported the developments. We've received invitations to take the exhibition to other cultural centers, and 2 universities have contacted us wanting to develop research on the impact of the project on the quality of life of the participants. You've created something really special here. The participating seniors seemed transformed. Mrs. Zulaida, previously so reserved, now proudly displayed a badge identifying her as a photography monitor, helping the new members who had joined the project. Mr. Clement organized a weekly discussion group where participants shared their experiences and learnings. But the biggest surprise awaited at Augusta's apartment. When they arrived there after visiting the center, they found the space completely transformed. The living room had been reorganized, documents filed, and on the balcony, small pots awaited the Alexandria rose seedlings they brought from Miami. Richard was here, explained the housekeeper who took care of the apartment. He spent the whole week organizing everything. He said it was a gift for you. A note on the center table confirmed, Aunt Augusta, in your absence, I took the liberty of organizing your apartment and preparing the space for the rose bushes you mentioned. I found a company specialized in urban gardening that adapted the balcony to receive the plants. Our last meeting made me reflect deeply on my actions and priorities. I now realize how much I've drifted away from the values that really matter, in pursuit of material success and control. I'd like to talk when you're willing. There's much I need to learn from you. With love and regret, Richard. Richard's attitude caught Augusta completely by surprise. The nephew had always been practical and materialistic, focused on results and profits. This gesture of care and consideration represented a significant change, or at least the beginning of one. It seems we weren't the only ones to undergo transformations during this week, commented Matthew upon reading the note. Augusta nodded, visibly moved. Perhaps Richard is finally understanding that there's more to life than accumulating wealth and power. If he's sincere, only time will tell, but I want to believe he is. In the following days, Matthew and Augusta immersed themselves in implementing the plans developed in Miami. They initiated the process of formalizing a non-profit organization that would serve as the legal structure for the expansion of Perspectives of Experience. They began to develop the methodology that would be used to train facilitators in different cities based on their joint experiences. The Alexandria rose seedlings were carefully planted on the adapted balcony of Augusta's apartment. The elderly woman dedicated herself to them with almost spiritual devotion, strictly following the instructions left by John himself so many years before in his last letter. The Alexandria roses need special attention in winter, recited Augusta from memory as she watered the seedlings with delicacy. John always said that he understood that precious things require constant care to flourish. Matthew, observing the scene, couldn't help but draw the parallel with the project they were developing together and with the human relationships they had rebuilt in recent weeks. One afternoon, while working on the documentation of the NGO, they were creating, Richard appeared without prior notice at Augusta's apartment. He carried a folder of documents and a resolute expression. "Aunt Matthew," he greeted with distant politeness, clearly still uncomfortable after everything that had happened. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," replied Augusta, indicating a chair for her nephew. "We were just discussing the legal aspects of the institution we intend to found for the Perspectives of Experience project." Richard nodded, placing his folder on the table. "That's exactly why I came." He opened the folder, revealing legal documents. "I hired the best specialists in the non-profit sector to properly structure the organization. There are tax, labor, and governance issues that need to be carefully planned from the beginning to avoid future problems." Augusta and Matthew exchanged surprised looks. They didn't expect this type of practical help from Richard, especially considering his recent history. "This is very useful, Richard." Matthew was the first to react. "Thank you." Augusta's nephew made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "Don't thank me yet. I also made some financial projections based on the expansion potential you mentioned." He took out more papers from the folder. "With the correct structure, the project can become self-sustainable in approximately 3 years, through a combination of private donations, public grants, and generating its own revenue through services and products." Richard's business practicality, which before seemed cold and calculating, now presented itself as a valuable complement to Matthew's social and artistic vision and Augusta's life experience. "What motivated you to do all this, nephew?" asked Augusta directly. Richard seemed uncomfortable with the question, as if he was still learning to deal with emotional vulnerabilities. "I spent the week reflecting on our last conversations, about what I learned from the exhibition." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "I saw how those seniors were transformed through the project. I saw purpose in their eyes, dignity, something that no amount of money can buy." He looked directly at his aunt before continuing. "And I realized that you were trying to show me this for years, Aunt, that there are different forms of success, different types of legacy. While I was focusing on accumulating wealth and power, you were discovering how to share experience and wisdom." Richard's words sounded sincere, stripped of his usual arrogance. Augusta smiled, extending her hand to touch her nephew's arm. "It's never too late to learn, Richard. Believe me, I know this from personal experience. I'm not saying I've completely transformed overnight," added Richard with honesty. "I'm still a businessman, I still value results and efficiency, but I want to direct these skills towards something that has real meaning, that leaves a positive impact." "That's exactly what the project needs now," intervened Matthew, recognizing the opportunity for genuine reconciliation. "Someone with your experience in management and strategic vision. If you're really interested, there's space for you on the team." The offer caught Richard by surprise. He expected, at most, a polite acceptance of his occasional help, not an invitation for continuous participation. "Are you serious? After everything I did?" "It's precisely because of everything that happened that your participation would be meaningful," explained Augusta. "This project was born from a reconciliation, from a chance for reparation. It would be appropriate for it to continue that way." At that moment, something subtly transformed in the dynamics between the three. They were no longer adversaries on opposite sides of a conflict, nor even circumstantial allies united by necessity. A true team was beginning to form, each bringing complementary strengths: Matthew's artistic sensitivity, Augusta's life wisdom, Richard's business competence. In the following weeks, the transformation deepened. The photography workshops at the New Dawn Senior Center continued, now with their own room, properly equipped thanks to Richard's contacts. Carmen led the implementation of the Miami Center, sending enthusiastic updates about the engagement of the young people at the community garden and the local seniors. The Perspectives, Photography and Memory NGO was officially registered, with Augusta as president of the board, Matthew as project director, and Richard as administrative financial director. The formal structure allowed for fundraising through incentive laws and partnerships with companies, accelerating the planned expansion. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of new equipment in the center's photography room, Matthew received an unexpected call. "Hello, Matthew Sanders. This is Bernard Miller, editor of Social Focus magazine. We followed the perspectives of Experience exhibition and would like to do a special feature on the project. Would you be available for an interview and photo session next week? The report in Social Focus, one of the country's leading photography magazines, represented significant recognition of the work developed. More than that, it was an opportunity for national exposure, potentially inspiring similar initiatives in other cities. Matthew shared the news with Augusta and Richard during the weekly dinner they had instituted to discuss the direction of the project, a tradition that had begun tensely but had gradually transformed into a meeting looked forward to by all. "That's fantastic," exclaimed Augusta, raising her wineglass in an improvised toast. "Exactly the kind of visibility we need to inspire other communities." Richard, always practical, was already thinking of the developments. "We need to be prepared for the increase in demand after the publication. I suggest accelerating the training of facilitators and finalizing the methodological manual." Matthew smiled, recognizing how the dynamics between them had transformed. Richard, previously seen as a threat, now perfectly complemented the team with his strategic vision. Augusta, who initially seemed just a kind elderly woman needing help, had revealed herself to be a wise and inspiring leader. "Who would have thought that all this would begin with a casual encounter at JFK Airport?" reflected Matthew, contemplating the path taken to get there. Augusta nodded, thoughtful. "Casual, perhaps, or perhaps it was exactly as it should be. Sometimes I think your father somehow orchestrated this meeting, you know, like a last gift for both of us. A gift for many others too," added Richard, indicating with a gesture the photographs of the participating seniors that now decorated the walls of Augusta's apartment. "Look at what you've created from that moment." The photo session and interview for Social Focus magazine was conducted at the New Dawn Senior Center with the participation of all the seniors in the project. It was a celebration more than a very simple report. The participants proudly showed their photographs, shared stories of how the project had transformed their lives. Mrs. Zulaida, previously so reserved, now spoke eloquently about how photography had given her a new language to express emotions that words couldn't capture. Mr. Clement demonstrated to the reporter how he had adapted photographic techniques to compensate for the tremor in his hands, transforming a limitation into a unique artistic style. Behind the cameras, Augusta, Matthew, and Richard observed with emotion the tangible impact of the work they had developed together. "Do you see that lady over there?" Augusta discreetly pointed to Mrs. Genoveva, a 92-year-old participant who was chatting animatedly with the magazine's photographer. "When she started in the project, she barely left her room. The social worker told me she hadn't spoken a word for months after losing her husband. Now look at her." Mrs. Genoveva was not only speaking, but gesturing energetically, explaining her series of photographs about the changes in the neighborhood over the decades she had lived there. Her eyes sparkled with renewed purpose. Her posture conveyed dignity. "That's why we do this," commented Matthew, capturing the moment with his own camera. "It's not just about teaching photographic techniques. It's about restoring silenced voices, valuing forgotten perspectives." Richard, who initially saw the project as just a philanthropic whim of his aunt, now understood its true dimension. "You know what impresses me most? The emotional sustainability of it all. It's not temporary or welfare help. You're providing tools for these people to rebuild their sense of self-worth, to rediscover their place in the world." The Social Focus article was published a month later with the title "Revealing Memories: How Photography is Transforming Lives in the Golden Years." It occupied 10 pages of the magazine with beautiful photographs of the seniors in action and samples of their work. The Perspectives of Experience project was presented as an innovative model of social intervention through art, highlighting not only its results, but also the inspiring story behind its creation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The impact was immediate and significant. In the days following the publication, the Perspectives, Photography and Memory NGO received dozens of emails from institutions across the United States interested in implementing similar projects. Municipal departments of culture and social assistance got in touch proposing partnerships. Companies offered donations of photographic equipment. "I think we'll need to expand more quickly than we planned," commented Richard during an emergency meeting to deal with the sudden avalanche of interest. "I suggest we prioritize finalizing the training material for facilitators and establishing clear criteria for institutional partnerships." Matthew agreed, although he expressed a concern. "We need to ensure that the expansion doesn't compromise the quality and essence of the project. It's not just about teaching photography, it's about creating spaces of dignity and expression." Augusta, who was listening attentively, brought her conciliatory perspective. "You're absolutely right. Both of you. We need to grow strategically, as Richard suggests, but without losing the soul of the project, as Matthew warns." She made a reflective pause before continuing. "Perhaps this is the moment to bring more people to the main team. We can't do everything alone." Augusta's suggestion led to the first major expansion of the NGO team. Professionals specialized in different areas were hired. An educator with experience in andragogy, adult education, a documentary photographer to complement Matthew's work, a social worker and a social project manager. The organization's headquarters, initially improvised in Augusta's apartment, moved to a suitable space in Chelsea. Richard negotiated a reduced rent with the owner, a former college colleague who was touched by the cause. Amid this rapid expansion, an unexpected event brought new challenges and reflections. Augusta suffered a fall at home, resulting in a femur fracture that required surgery. Although the procedure was successful, the recovery period would be long, with significantly reduced mobility for at least 3 months. The news shook the entire team, especially Matthew, who had developed an almost filial bond with the elderly woman. After the surgery, when Augusta was still in the ICU, Matthew and Richard waited together in the hospital waiting room, both visibly concerned. "She'll be fine," assured Richard, trying to sound confident despite his own anxiety. "The doctor said the surgery was perfect, and Aunt has always been strong." Matthew nodded, trying to cling to that certainty, but Augusta's fragility on the surgery stretcher had deeply affected him. "It's strange, you know. In such a short time, she's become such an important person in my life. Almost like a second mother," Richard observed Matthew with a contemplative expression. "For her, you're practically a son, Matthew, the son she never had. You brought back something to her life that even I didn't realize was missing. Purpose, genuine connection." The conversation was interrupted by the nurse, informing them that Augusta had awakened from anesthesia and was already in her room, where they could go. They found her pale and worn out, but with the same spirit as always. As soon as she saw them, Augusta tried to adjust herself in the bed, making a grimace of pain in the process. "My boys," she murmured, with a weak but affectionate voice. "How good to see you together, without you disputing my inheritance or my sanity." The joke, even in such serious circumstances, drew tense smiles from both. "Aunt, you need to rest," admonished Richard, delicately adjusting Augusta's pillow. "The doctor said the surgery was a success, but recovery will require patience." "Patience was never my strong suit," grumbled Augusta. "And we have so much work ahead with the expansion of the project." "The project continues, Mrs. Augusta," assured Matthew. "The team is committed, and Richard and I will handle things while you recover." Augusta looked at the two young men with an evaluative expression, as if pondering something important. Perhaps this is a necessary test. The true success of any initiative is not how well it functions while its founder is present, but how it sustains itself when they step away. In the following weeks, Augusta's recovery progressed slowly. She was transferred to Matthew's apartment, who insisted on hosting her during the initial period of rehabilitation. The young photographer adapted the space to accommodate a hospital, bed and necessary equipment, hired a nurse for the periods he would be absent, and reorganized his routine to ensure the elderly woman received the best possible care. This new dynamic brought challenges and revelations for both. Augusta, always independent and active, now faced significant physical limitations, depending on help for basic tasks. Matthew, in turn, discovered in himself a capacity for care and dedication he didn't know he possessed. "You don't need to do all this, young man," commented Augusta one night, as Matthew carefully adjusted the lifting system he had installed to facilitate the elderly woman's mobility. "You could have left me in a rehabilitation clinic. And miss, the chance to repay everything you've done for me? No way." Matthew smiled, checking if the equipment was secure. "Besides, I think my father wouldn't forgive me if I didn't take care of you as if you were family." The mention of John brought a special gleam to Augusta's eyes. "You know, when I'm sleeping, sometimes I dream of the rose garden. John is there, tending to the plants, and we talk like in the old days." She made a reflective pause. "In these dreams there was never a breach, never unjust accusations. It's as if we had lived the friendship we should have had." Matthew sat on the edge of the bed, touched by the elderly woman's vulnerability. Perhaps it's his way of saying that everything is fine now, that the circles have really closed. During Augusta's convalescence period, the NGO continued to grow, under the joint leadership of Matthew and Richard. The differences in personality and approach that initially seemed incompatible proved to be complementary. Matthew's social and artistic sensitivity balanced by Richard's administrative pragmatism. The first remote center of the project was officially inaugurated in Miami, coordinated by Carmen. The opening ceremony, transmitted by video conference so Augusta could participate even bedridden, gathered local authorities, representatives of social institutions and mainly the first participants, seniors from the neighborhood and young people from the community garden. Helen, emotional, spoke briefly during the inauguration. "When my husband John started his work in this garden, he dreamed of creating a meeting space between generations where wisdom and enthusiasm could complement each other. Today, through the work of our children, this dream gains new dimensions and meanings." The image of Mrs. Helen next to the Alexandria roses that John had cultivated with such care, sharing this significant moment with Augusta, even at a distance, symbolized the closing of one cycle and the beginning of another. After 3 months of recovery, Augusta finally received medical authorization to return to her own apartment, although still with limited mobility and requiring regular physical therapy. Matthew helped her resettle, organizing the space to maximize accessibility and safety. The balcony, transformed into a small urban garden by Richard, now displayed Alexandria roses blooming vigorously, their dark red petals contrasting with the gray of the city. Augusta spent hours there, caring for the plants in the best way her condition allowed, finding in the roses a tangible connection with the past and its renewed meanings. It was on one of those afternoons on the balcony, while Augusta delicately watered the rose bushes and Matthew organized materials for the next photography workshop, that the young man received an email that would significantly change the course of his professional life. "Mrs. Augusta, you won't believe it," he exclaimed, looking fixedly at his laptop screen. "I just received an invitation from the International Documentary Photography Agency. They saw the article in Social Focus and want to offer me a scholarship for a social documentation artistic residency program in Europe. It would be 6 months working with some of the world's greatest documentary photographers. The opportunity was extraordinary, the kind of chance every documentary photographer dreams of receiving. It represented not only professional recognition, but the possibility of learning and artistic growth in an environment of international excellence." Augusta smiled, genuinely happy for the young man. "That's wonderful, Matthew. Exactly what you deserve. When would it start?" "In 2 months," replied Matthew, still processing the information. "But I don't know if I can accept. The project is in a crucial phase of expansion. Your recovery isn't complete yet and—" "Stop right there," interrupted Augusta with surprising firmness. "Don't even think of refusing this opportunity because of me or the project. Remember what I always say? Truly meaningful initiatives should be able to prosper even when their founders step away." Matthew hesitated, divided between the professional opportunity of a lifetime and the commitment to the work they had built together. "Do you really think the project would be okay without me for 6 months? Not only would it be okay, but this would be the definitive test of its sustainability." Augusta carefully set down the watering can, turning all her attention to Matthew. "Besides, think of how much you'll be able to bring back. new techniques, methodologies, international contacts. It will be an investment in the future of perspectives. The perspective presented by Augusta made sense, but Matthew still felt insecure. I'll think carefully. I need to consult the team, see how we would organize everything in my absence. In the following days, the subject of the International Artistic Residency became the center of conversations at the NGO. To Matthew's surprise, the entire team was enthusiastically in favor of his participation. "It's a unique opportunity, Matthew," affirmed Richard, during a meeting specifically convened to discuss the matter. From a strategic point of view, having a project director with international experience will add enormous value to the organization. The educator Maria added, "Besides, we already have the methodology documented and trained facilitators. The ongoing projects have qualified coordinators. Structurally, we're prepared for your temporary absence." The unanimous support from the team moved Matthew, but one concern persisted. How would Augusta handle everything during this period? Despite significant improvement, the elderly woman still faced physical limitations and occasional moments of vulnerability. It was Helen who offered the solution during one of her regular visits to New York. "Why don't I come spend these 6 months here? I could stay in Augusta's apartment, helping with whatever is necessary, while closely following the development of the project." Helen's proposal surprised everyone, especially Augusta. "You would do that, Helen? Leave Miami for so long? Why not? Carmen is well established there, coordinating the project center. My sister can stay at my house. And frankly, I think it would do us good to spend some time together, Augusta. There are so many stories of John I haven't shared with you yet. So many memories." The idea of Helen temporarily living with Augusta seemed an ideal solution. It would not only ensure practical support during the elderly woman's continued recovery, but also deepen the emotional reconnection between the families, a healing process that benefited everyone. So, 2 months later, Matthew embarked for Europe, taking with him not only photographic equipment, but the pride and blessings of his expanded family. At the airport, Augusta, now walking with the aid of only a cane, embraced him for a long time. "Go and absorb everything you can, my young man, but never forget where you came from and the shoulders on which you stand." "How could I forget?" replied Matthew, emotional. "You are my foundation, my inspiration." Helen, Richard, Carmen, who had come especially from Miami for the farewell, and the entire NGO team were also present, forming a circle of support that conveyed security and belonging. "Come back full of stories to tell?" asked Helen, affectionately adjusting Matthew's scarf. "And photographs, of course, many photographs. And some international contacts for funding wouldn't be a bad idea," added Richard with a smile, drawing laughter from everyone. During the following 6 months, while Matthew lived his transformative experience in Europe, working with vulnerable communities in different countries and learning advanced documentary photography techniques, the Perspectives of Experience project continued to flourish in the United States. Helen and Augusta established a harmonious routine in the New York apartment. Mornings were dedicated to physical therapy and the elderly woman's physical recovery, afternoons to monitoring the NGO's activities, and nights to long conversations about John, about the shared past, about the paths that had separated them and now reconnected them through Matthew. "You know what John admired most about you, Augusta?" commented Helen one night as they dined on the balcony among the Alexandria roses now in full bloom. "Your ability to dream big, to visualize possibilities where others saw only obstacles." Augusta smiled, touched by the revelation. "And I admired in him the authenticity, the ability to remain true to his values even when the world encouraged otherwise." She made a reflective pause before adding, "I think we complemented each other in a way, like Matthew and Richard complement each other now." Helen nodded, understanding the analogy. "Life has these curious patterns, doesn't it? The same dynamics repeat themselves in different generations, with nuances proper to each time." With Matthew in Europe and Augusta still in recovery, Richard assumed greater prominence in the daily management of the NGO. To the surprise of many, including himself, he revealed himself to be not only administratively competent, but also sensitive to the human dimensions of the project, something that previously seemed absent in his results-focused personality. New centers of the project were established in Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles, following the methodology developed in New York and adapted to local realities. The expansion, carefully planned by Richard, maintained the balance between growth and preservation of the original essence. Matthew's return after 6 months of immersion in international documentary photography was marked by a warm reception at the same airport where everything had begun. Augusta, now walking without assistance, although still with certain caution, was the first to embrace him. "Welcome back, my son, we missed you so much." Matthew, visibly transformed by the experience, more mature, more confident, with a broader view of his craft, embraced the elderly woman who had become a maternal figure in his life for a long time. "I missed you all too, but I brought so much with me, not just in the portfolio, but mainly here," he pointed to his heart. The week following Matthew's return, the Perspectives Photography and Memory NGO organized a special event at the New York Public Library. It was, officially, a presentation of the results of the first complete year of activities in all centers, but symbolically it represented much more, the consolidation of a shared dream, born from a casual encounter that fate had transformed into purpose. The event gathered participants from all project centers, seniors, young facilitators, institutional partners and supporters. A collective exhibition presented selected photographs from each city, showing the diversity of perspectives and stories captured through the project. In an especially moving moment, Matthew, Augusta, Helen and Richard climbed onto the stage, together. Each briefly shared their perspective on the journey that had brought them there, the personal transformations they had experienced, the learnings they would carry forever. Augusta, the last to speak, addressed the audience with the serenity and wisdom gained after so many crossings. "They say we can't change the past, and that's true, but we can reframe it through our actions in the present." The Perspectives Project was born from a coincidence that today I recognize as a gift from life. The encounter between me and Matthew Sanders, son of my friend John, from whom I distanced myself due to a mistake I regretted for decades. She made a significant pause, seeking Helen's gaze in the front row, who nodded encouragingly. "This project isn't just about teaching photography to seniors, although that is valuable in itself. It's about reconciliation, with our past, with our choices, with those we've hurt or by whom we've been hurt. It's about recognizing that it's never too late to plant new seeds, even when the winter of life seems to be approaching." She extended her hands, inviting Matthew, Helen, and Richard to come closer. "Look at us." An elderly woman who made serious mistakes in her past, the son of a man who was unjustly accused by this same elderly woman, the wife of this man who found in her heart the capacity to forgive, and a young businessman who almost allowed greed to obscure his most fundamental values. Unlikely allies united by a purpose greater than our individual stories. Augusta's words resonated deeply with the audience, many with tears in their eyes. If this project teaches anything, it's that our stories aren't complete until the last chapter, that we can, at any moment, choose a new path, reframe our past, plant seeds for a future we might not see bloom, but that will nourish generations that will come after us. In the front rows, the participating seniors of the project nodded in recognition, many of them having found, through photography, a way of reconciliation with their own stories and memories. At the end of the event, as the audience slowly dispersed, Augusta, Helen, Matthew and Richard remained on the stage for a moment, absorbing the energy of what they had achieved together. "And to think that it all began with a simple help at the airport," commented Matthew, looking affectionately at Augusta, without imagining that the millionaire nephew was watching. Richard smiled, remembering his initial role in that story. And what a problematic nephew I was, seeing threats and ulterior motives where there was only generosity and genuine human connection. "Each of us was trapped in our own limited narrative," observed Helen, with the serene wisdom that characterized her. Augusta in her guilt for the past, Matthew in his struggle to honor his father's memory, Richard in his materialistic vision of success. It took this encounter, this intertwining of stories, for each to be freed and expand. Augusta took Helen's hand between hers in a gesture of deep gratitude. John would be proud of what we've built together, of how we transformed pain into purpose, hurt into reconciliation. Matthew capturing the moment with his photographer's eye, the perfect composition of four people whose lives had intertwined in unexpected and transformative ways, felt the almost palpable presence of his father in that circle. As if John Sanders, the gardener who planted not only flowers but also values, was there, completing the circle of reconciliation and shared purpose. The next morning, Augusta woke with the first ray of sunlight touching her face through the bedroom window. A year had passed since that encounter at the airport, when a kind young man had offered help to an apparently disoriented elderly woman. She slowly made her way to the balcony, where the Alexandria roses bloomed in their maximum splendor. She delicately caressed one of the roses, remembering the words that John had written in his last never-delivered letter. Perhaps it's time to plant new seeds before the winter of life comes to an end. Seeds had been planted, not just roses, but human connections, opportunities, reconciliation, and now they flourished magnificently, spreading their fragrance far beyond what any of them could have imagined. Augusta smiled, feeling a deep peace she had sought for decades. The circle was complete, the legacy ensured, the roses blooming. What more could a person desire in the autumn of their life? End of story. Now, tell us what you thought of this story of unexpected connections and second chances. Matthew's gesture at the airport changed not just the life of an elderly woman, but dozens of people. And have you ever had a casual encounter that transformed your life? Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.